Hey, Matt here. Just before we start the show, I just have a request. I need some help. In order to get more listeners for the show, we need to have more iTunes reviews and ratings. And the same goes for anyone listening in the Stitcher app. I know for the Stitcher app, I need 5 reviews to show up in public forums. And the same thing goes for iTunes, I believe. So if 5 of you could leave a review for the show, that'd be great. That way we get more people listening. And hopefully they'll leave reviews themselves in the future. So thank you very much. I'll wait while you do it. Go ahead. Before we start the show, I can wait, okay? Okay, thank you. Let's start the show. The Enoch Pill, a serialized podcast novel by Matthew William. Chapter 3. When Kizzy awoke the next morning, the events of the night before seemed like a distant dream, but they had happened, and the world was different now. She hopped out of bed and stretched, reaching up towards the ceiling. There was a to-do list on her desk. Number 1. Pick up the crows and bury them in the woods. They'll poison the plants. Number 2. The city is calling for 2 crates of beans. Please send them. Number 3. Clean your room. It's a mess. At the bottom, it was signed from Mother. Kizzy got dressed and had some oats for breakfast. Preparing the bean crates would be the easiest job, she decided. As she left the house, she kept a safe distance from the woods, her eyes scanning every dark patch. In the barn, she grabbed the scythe from the wall of tools and set it in the tractor's cabin. Then she loaded 2 empty supply crates onto the tractor's trailer. The tractor's gas tank was nearly empty, so she grabbed one of the ethanol canisters and poured all the liquid into the tank. She had to remember to get the new canisters from inside the house at the end of the day. She hopped up into the tractor's cabin and started the engine. It shook and smoked like crazy. The tractor was old and falling apart, but it started faithfully, and it ran smoothly once it got going. After backing out of the barn, she drove down the dirt road that led to the edge of their farm. The sun shined through the late summer leaves. The beans they had planted in the spring had grown and were matured now. Kizzy passed Laura's house. Her mother was home. She watched her absent-mindedly doing the dishes in the kitchen window. Kizzy waved, but the woman remained in her own little world. Why was she always like that? She couldn't remember ever seeing her smiling or happy, just always staring off into space, cleaning what seemed to be the same damn dish over and over again. Kizzy promised herself never to become like that. She drove down the path next to the canal until it came to the field where she'd be harvesting that day. She parked the tractor, and it vibrated to a halt. With the scythe in hand, she hopped out and stretched the muscles in her arms and neck and back. You'd cramp up pretty bad if you didn't do that. From the edge of the field, she began to swing at the beans, chopping them off at the stalks. The scythe was so sharp, it sliced through the plants like they were butter. It made her feel powerful, like some sort of Japanese samurai warrior, mowing down hundreds of peasant soldiers. Swing, 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 swing. The beanstalks fell, landing awkwardly, as if the peasants' legs were being chopped out from under them. She wished she could experience war like that. It must have made them feel so alive to be so close to death. An hour of hard, hot work passed. Kizzy wiped the dust and sweat from her forehead. She looked back at the devastation she had wreaked. The field full of soldiers lay dead. Kizzy raked the beans into one huge pile and used a pitchfork to shovel them into the supply crates. The work was repetitive and boring. The sun beat down on her from above. How much longer would she have to do this? All her life? Couldn't she just switch jobs with somebody someday? She got good grades and was a hard worker, but farming the beans was the most important job there was, and she had experience. Any aptitude test she took would assign her right back here. You're really smart. You should be a farmer. You're really dumb. You should be a farmer. There was no escape. But if she could trade with someone, hopefully someone who worked in an office and ate cake all day, that would be the best. When the crates were full, she climbed up and started the tractor. Now they had to be delivered. She drove them to the canal and backed the trailer onto the unloading dock. She untied the crates and used her key to lock them up, so no one could steal their beans, then pushed them down the metal ramp into the water. There were a ton of crates floating by that day, all headed towards the city. The hundreds of farms upstream had been harvesting their first crop of Enoch beans. And in the city, the mutants would use their factories to process the beans into the Enoch pills. Then the pills would be mailed back out to the farms in the supply crates. Each person received 7 pills per week. The new circle of life. Kizzy and her mother would take the pills and live on to grow more beans and then send them into the city. Beans to pills and then back again. On and on, forever and ever. Amen. It made Kizzy feel calm, the fact that eternity stretched out in front of her. Anything was possible. She could do whatever she wanted, eventually. There was so much to look forward to. She'd be able to watch animals adapt and change over the eons, see mountains rise and fall around her, chart the stars as they carved their way across the night sky, fading in and fading out, witness supernovas exploding silently in space, maybe even visit them someday. But nobody else ever made plans like that. They all just seemed to be waiting for something to happen. She watched the crates float away. When would they reach the city? Who would open them? Would it be the same person who had mailed her the Banshee album? Their lives were connected, but they would never know each other. And that was just fine. The mutants would probably do terrible things to her if they captured her. Supposedly, there was a young girl who had wandered too close to the city one night. They say the mutants caught her and ate her alive and sent her bones back to her family in a supply crate. They had been picked clean. Kizzy knew the story was probably bullcrap. It just seemed like too much work to mail the bones back out to the family. It didn't add up. But she didn't want to find out if it was true firsthand. On the drive home, something caught her eye on the side of the road. A large white bird had gotten itself stuck in the wire fence and was flailing about, trying to free itself. Who knows how long it had been there? Kizzy hated to see animals suffering, so she stopped the tractor and hopped out. As she approached the bird, it suddenly ceased its struggle. It looked at her. Its breathing was raspy and heavy. Kizzy realized it was a crow, but it was as white as snow, with small red eyes. She had never, ever seen a white crow before. She couldn't recall ever seeing one by itself. They only flew in flocks. The look of it made her queasy. She shivered. Its wing was entwined in the steel wire. The bird's struggle had plucked its feathers and cut into the skin of its wing. Kizzy tiptoed towards it. She knew that a trapped animal could give itself a heart attack if it became too stressed. She reached out and loosened the wire while she pulled at the bird's wing. It squawked in pain and tried to fly away, but Kizzy moved swiftly and the bird popped free. It waddled away from her and stretched out its wings in the sunlight. It turned and hopped up onto the wire fence. It looked at her with one eye, small and red. It seemed to stare right through her. The sight of all those tiny blood vessels made Kizzy's skin crawl. Suddenly it lunged at her and tried to peck her in the eye. Kizzy raised her hand to block the beak, and it pierced her palm and all down her forearm. Quickly the bird turned and flew away, disappearing over the horizon. "That little freak," said Kizzy. She looked at the wounds on her arm. It had broken the skin, and the blood came up to the surface. In the tractor, she found a cloth to wrap around her hand and arm. She had better get back to the house to disinfect it. As she drove, she noticed Laura walking home from school along the side of the road. Kizzy suddenly felt stressed. She had a plan to make her forget about the whole getting the album business. She just had to stay on her good side. Kizzy pulled up and opened the door, waving for her to climb up in. Laura smiled and glanced over each shoulder. Then she rocked out on an air guitar. Kizzy grinned. Good thing no one else saw that. It was really lame. "What happened to your hand?" Laura asked, after she climbed in. Some crow did it. How was school?" "Same crap, different day. Too bad I missed it." "Camilla's nose still looks a little funny, actually," Laura said with a smile. "Really?" Kizzy asked. She felt kind of guilty, albeit a little proud. "Yeah, she was saying how they should break yours if hers doesn't grow back to normal." That made Kizzy feel a little worried, but it was still worth it. They pulled up towards the barn. "You ready to listen to some music?" Laura asked. "Oh yeah," Kizzy said. "We still have the whole second album too." Laura got out to open up the barn door, and Kizzy pulled the tractor inside and killed the engine. "How about we just concentrate on getting this Kizzy stopped. She saw the record player was partially uncovered from under the blue tarp. "What?" asked Laura as she walked inside. "The record player. It's uncovered." "Did your mother find it?" Laura asked. "I can't tell," Kizzy answered. She climbed out from the tractor and crept towards the tarps. Had the wind blown them like that? Or had her mother done it? "If my mother had found it, she would have either hid the fact that she found it, or she would have taken it away. Right?" She turned and looked back at Laura. "Right?" Laura shook her head and put on her classic confused face. "Unless this is some sort of test. She's testing me to see what I'll do." "I don't know what you're talking about, Kizzy," Laura said, backing towards the door. She looked around for a hidden camera or a sound recorder. "You were supposed to destroy that thing. I told you to." "What?" Kizzy asked. "I said I told you to destroy it." Kizzy shook her head. "Leave then." She pointed to the door. Laura stood frozen. "Get out of here," Kizzy shouted. She ran and grabbed Laura by the arm and marched her out the doorway. "Wait, you forgot your homework," Laura said, struggling to take the assignments from her backpack. I'll see you tomorrow, maybe?" "Whatever," Kizzy said, grabbing the papers. She folded them and stuffed them into her back pocket. She couldn't believe it. Laura had actually fallen for it. Kizzy covered the record player again. There was no point in leaving it open for her mother to really find. She looked out the window and saw the pile of white bags at the edge of the forest. It could wait till tomorrow. She went inside to the bathroom to wash off her wound. As she let the water run down her hand, she looked to the left, and her mother was standing there. "I was out in the barn today," she said. Kizzy was paralyzed. "Did you forget something?" "What?" She wasn't about to admit to a crime she wasn't yet accused of. "The ethanol? You've only got empty cans out there." Kizzy tried to smile. "Oh yeah, I'll take care of that." "There's another thing too. I think you know what it is." Kizzy nodded. Her mother left. What did she mean? The crows? Or the record player? Numbly, Kizzy walked outside. She spent the rest of the day watering the plants out in the fields to avoid her mother. She wouldn't face her if she didn't have to. All of a sudden, she began to have a bizarre ache in her lower abdomen. It was a strange mix of pain and nausea. She pressed on the sore spot, and that made it feel a little better. An electrical storm came rolling in that night. The first bolts of lightning flashed on the horizon as Kizzy drove the tractor back to the barn. The thunder came barreling over the fields in a low, drum-like rumble. The smell of rain in the distance wafted over the landscape. In the barn, she eyed the tarps that covered the record player. Had her mother really seen it? It made Kizzy nervous as hell, just leaving it there, but she had to. As she walked to the house, the lightning cracked closer and the thunder rattled through her lungs. Her mother was sitting at the kitchen table, painting the family tree again. Kizzy noticed that her own branch was still intact. That was a good sign. Or was it? For some reason, her mother seemed anxious. That was not a good sign. Had she really seen the record player? Was she planning on taking Kizzy's hearing that night? The flock of crows attacked me yesterday, Kizzy said, hoping to garner some sympathy. Really? Kizzy nodded. I guess I'll make some calls to the other farms then, see if they've had that happen too. Kizzy waved goodnight. Her mother waved back, the troubled look still on her face. When Kizzy got to her room, she took off her jeans and flannel shirt and unstrapped her knife from around her ankle. She hung them all up on the closet door. As she was getting into bed, the image of her mother sneaking into her room with an eardrum remover flashed before her eyes. She went back to the closet and grabbed the knife and placed it under her pillow. Finally, she turned off the light and climbed into bed. She spent a long time just watching the door, hoping that it wouldn't open, hoping she wouldn't have to fight to keep her hearing. She felt guilty for causing her mother so much unhappiness. But the whole thing was being blown way out of proportion. The music wasn't going to kill her. Laura listened to it and she was just fine. A terrible person maybe, but physically fine. She felt the anger towards Laura bubbling up in her stomach. Kizzy was proud of the fact that she had fooled her so easily, but now she was in the exact same spot. Being caught with the music was so dangerous. She felt stressed just knowing that the record player was still out in the barn. Kizzy exhaled. Was the music even worth it? Shouldn't she just give it up? It would make her life so much simpler. How could she go back? The music made her feel like things were magic, like life was worth living. Those moments were so hard to find, and the music was like a switch that made them appear. Could life ever feel like that all the time? She had forever to find out. The thunderstorm continued as Kizzy listened to the pitter-patter of the rain on the rooftop. That bizarre pain in her lower abdomen came back again. Hopefully it was just nothing. She let out a deep sigh and stared out the window. A crack of lightning lit up the woods like a camera flash. Something was standing out there, at the edge of the forest, only 30 feet away. Kizzy gasped and pushed herself down to the floor. It was the creature from the ghost town, she was sure of it. A lump the size of an apple formed in her chest. What did that creature want? Maybe it was a ghost from one of the townsfolk, haunting her for trespassing on their territory. A moment passed. Was it still there? Kizzy crawled to the window and slowly pushed herself up to the sill. She didn't want to, but she did it. She had to see what was out there. It was so dark on the other side of the window, she couldn't see a thing. She brought her face close to the glass, close enough so that her breath began to fog it. She squinted. It was too dark. That creature could have been creeping towards the window, and she would have no way of knowing it. She just needed another flash of lightning. That was all she needed. Thank you for listening to the Enoch Pill podcast. To support this podcast, there's a few things that you can do. You can subscribe and leave a rating on iTunes. You can also like the Enoch Pill on Facebook, and you can visit the blog, theenochpill.wordpress.com, for information on the next episode. Music for this episode comes from bensound.com and incompetech.com. Further information and track listings can be found in the show notes.